Welcome to Nice J with JJ Smith. Thank you for listening. We did take a nice long break over the holidays, if you consider half of December and most of January the holidays, but we'll give myself a little bit of a break there. When you run a business, there's a lot of end-of-year financial stuff and tax-wise that is just a big time suck. So I had to hit pause a little bit, but I've been keeping up, and I have a bunch of good posts planned now that the NBA season is mathematically half over. But today we're talking All-Stars, or at least the All-Star game. When I was growing up, the All-Star game, it mattered. It was a unique chance to see all your favorite players really competing against each other. And it was the only time you would see some of those players competing until the playoffs. This was long before League Pass and social media highlights. And for me, I didn't even have cable, so if it wasn't on NBC on Sunday, I couldn't watch it. There might be a little less defense early on, but the games are played with something that resembled a normal competitive match, especially in the second half. We had MJ, then Kobe, and they were playing for keeps, and that tenacity and tone spread to everybody else. It also showed you who rolled over on their belly and who the lead dogs were. Lately, say for the last, 10 years, maybe more, the game has slowly devolved into something, I guess you'd call it an embarrassment. The commish had to come out and admonish some of the players for lack of effort in some cases. They've been tinkering with the framework. And there were a lot of reasons for this. And the games have been bad. But I'm still someone who thinks being named an All-Star matters, even if it doesn't have the contract implications of, say, All-NBA at the end of the year. A rule introduced in 2011 had previously allowed a first and second round pick to receive like 30% of the salary cap in their next contract if they had an all-star starter on their resume, and they had to do that twice for that to kick in. However, that is no longer the case. It's not part of the rookie supermax, which means Wembanyama's selection as a starter won't impact his extension. So they've sort of removed the financial incentive of the all-star game, but that's still the All-NBA at the end of the year does impact contracts, which is kind of crazy too. Over the last few years, there have been some format changes to make the game better. Most have probably failed. But this year we have a new structure, which is important to understand. The first thing is money. So there's a big prize pool, $1.8 million, which may not sound like a lot for some of these multimillionaires, but it's enough to matter, I think. Championship winners get $125,000 per player. Runners-up get $50,000 for each player. And then teams eliminated before the final get $25,000 per player. Now, you notice they mentioned teams. So the NBA All-Star Game structure for 2026 features a new USA versus World round-robin tournament with 3 teams. So 2 U.S. teams, 2 American teams, and 1 World. Each with at least 8 players competing in 4 12-minute games, with the top 2 teams advancing to a 12-minute championship game. So this breaks from the traditional East versus West format. And I think the idea is, recognizing it's a global game, kind of changing things up to be a little bit more exciting, shorter, quicker, more intense. But really, it's to try to fix the All-Star game, let's be honest. Put another way, it's basically 4 12-minute quarters, although those quarters will be played in a far different manner than usual. The first 3 quarters will be made up of the round-robin play featuring the 3 teams, so each team plays twice. The fourth quarter, quote-unquote, will then be the game featuring the 2 best teams after round-robin. If all 3 teams are tied, if they all have 1-1 records, the 2 with the highest point differentials will advance to the championship game. So it's, basically the same amount of basketball, but a very different way of getting there. The interesting thing is the players are voted this year, and it's a mix of it's a 2-step process. So you begin with a fan vote that determines the starters. To pick the starters, the NBA relied on 50% of the fan votes around the world, combined with 25% from the NBA players. They vote themselves. We can talk about how that's a little weird. And 25% of votes from NBA media. Those votes determine the 10 starters who were just announced. But they were all voted on without positional requirements. So we simply picked our top 5. I was voting quite often. The starters have been announced. We'll talk about that. But the 7 reserves from each conference will be named on February 1st. And that's also the first night of NBC Peacock Sunday Night Basketball. So the starters will be the top 5 vote getters, regardless of position, and the reserves will be the top 7. also regardless of position. But I have a big problem with the structure of the voting not really matching the structure of the teams and the game format. The All-Star game has 3 teams, so what we conventionally think of as starters isn't quite right. And why the NBA forced the old-fashioned voting, albeit without positions, by conference when the game is USA versus the world is honestly super weird. How will the 2 USA teams be divided? Why didn't we simply pick 5 USA players and 5 world players, or even pick the 5 starters for each of the 3 teams? When the rest of the All-Star players are named on February 1st, we'll have a total of 24 players from around the league who will then be divided up into the 3 teams of 8 players. One of those teams will represent the world, while the other 2 will be made of purely American players again. I'm assuming there's a plan to make the 2 USA teams competitive and as well-rounded as possible, but it's a bit annoying that the voting didn't better mirror the actual gameplay. To me, it feels a little half-baked, to be honest, and it forces the league's hand in picking reserves to fill out 16 Americans and 8 world players. If those 24 players voted don't fall into the original split. Now, they've dealt with that. The NBA commissioner, Adam Silver, said they will name extra players to the roster to get the minimum 16 Americans and minimum 8 international players. That's a mess. It's a mess. But let's talk starters. So even though there will be 15 starters, not 10, we only have 10. So if there's like a SMH emoji, I would put it here. The Eastern Conference. This conference is clearly inferior. I'm sorry. And this is sort of the origin of the problem that I have with it. We have Giannis, Jaylen Brown, Jalen Brunson, Cade Cunningham, and Tyrese Maxey. So yeah, Giannis from the Bucks, Jalen from the Celtics, Brunson from the Knicks, Cade from the Pistons, and Maxey from the 76ers. Those are all good, big basketball towns that are, I think, pretty active in the voting. And it's not like any one of those players are bad. Actually, some of these guys are my favorites. When I talk to young basketball players that I coach about footwork, Brunson's the guy. Like, that guy's footwork is ridiculous. When I talk about up-and-coming players that I want to be really great for the USA, Cade Cunningham is right there. Maxey's right there. Maxey's so fast and has taken a big step up. I mean, Jaylen Brown is basically running the Celtics without Tatum this year. And, of course, Giannis is Giannis, right? So they're not bad players, but that is a weak team when you consider what the Western Conference is going to put out there if they were playing conference basketball, which they're not. So we'll talk about that. The Western Conference top vote getters, no surprise that Stephen Curry, fan favorite, right? But then you have Doncic, you have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, you got Joker, and Victor Wembanyama. So can you imagine, let's say they had a starting 5. You got Curry and Doncic as guards, Shai probably as, maybe even as point, and then Joker and Victor on the same team. That team would destroy the first Eastern Conference 5, I'm sorry. With the current starters, probably the biggest gripes would be Anthony Edwards and Devin Booker in the West and Donovan Mitchell in the East. I mean, every year the big thing after the All-Star starters are announced or, who got snubbed. Certainly that's true once they announce the reserves. But this year it's a little bit more convoluted because 3 of those players, they all might end up on one of the teams, even as starters. It's just kind of dumb. The conference voting also makes the U.S. team weaker, in my opinion, than it might otherwise be. The way these starters are going to be divided up right now, it would be as such. So the world, this is for the top 5 vote getters for the world. This is going to be their team. You have Giannis, Doncic, Shai, Joker, and Victor. Come on. I mean, defensively, not the best team. Except for, I think Wemby's going to make up for that. Certainly around the hoop, but they're big, and that's a good team. But the top 5 for the U.S., not great. You got Curry, Jaylen Brown, Brunson, Cunningham, and Maxey. While all talented, not a great 5 to have out there. So you can it starts to expose a little bit of the weird voting mismatch with the way the games are going to be played. Because most of the better world players play in the West, the voting format skews the voting results. 7 out of the top 10 world players play in the West. And 2 of the worst of those 10 players are the ones in the East, Siakam and Anunoby. Again, not bad players, but the global team skews hard to the West beyond Giannis. That pushed a lot of the better U.S. Western Conference players down in comparison and floats some of the weaker U.S. players up higher in the East than they would have been if the voting more reflected the team structure of the All-Star game. So if it was pick your top 5 in the world, pick your top 5 in 2 splits of USA players, which is probably how it should have been done. I mean, for me, this is a little bit dumb. While I like Jaylen Brown, Brunson, and Maxey, they're going to have to spread out those guards. And the 5 USA starters named is not great. And honestly, if we're voting on 2 starting 5s for USA players with some positioning, we wouldn't have to rely on reserve voting to make them actual teams. Let me use one player as an example. And I'm not a Booker stan, or at least historically not. I might become one now. But for the most part of his career, and I actually met Book his first year in the league. We did the marketing for the Suns, and I was right there with him. But what the Suns did for Book for many years, like the way they promoted him, and they kind of propped up some stats, because he was the only thing the team had. He was a good player on a bad team, and it's always hard to know how good that player is. Yeah, he got 70, but it was not a great team, right? Until the finals run and the Olympic run, where I think Booker proved his mettle, at least to me. He didn't have to prove anything to anybody, but to me he did. And now he's playing super smart, polished basketball, somewhat in the same flavor as he did in the Olympics. And it has his team outperforming everyone's expectations, certainly my expectations as well, to just make sure I'm admitting that. Because of the voting process, Booker is 17th by voting ranking, if you exclude the world's players. That's pretty nuts. That means he wouldn't make either of the top 8 USA teams. It's crazy. And that also forces us to recognize a prevalent East Coast bias in the voting too. Using Booker as an example again, you think 2 Raptors players, Scotty Barnes and Brandon Ingram, have been better than Booker this season? That's ridiculous. And they're above him. Now, to prove my point, if you were to split the U.S. players by ranking, making a first team and a second team based on the voting alone, you start to see kind of like this weird structure. And the second team, in my opinion, would kick the first team's butt. And it would only be competitive because Curry kind of just barely ends up on that first team. So you got Cade, Tyrese, Jalen, Brunson, and then Jaylen Brown, and then Steph Curry. That's a small team, super guard heavy. They would struggle against Anthony Edwards, Donovan Mitchell, Karl Anthony Towns, Kevin Durant, and Jalen Johnson, who is, if you don't know, crushing it right now. I think that second team beats the first team, and that kind of exposes a little bit of the float up of the Eastern players, in my opinion. Now, after the first 10, you go down to the next 5. This is where it gets kind of weird. You have LeBron, which is probably where he should be. I'm not one of those guys that thinks he should just make the All-Star game because he's LeBron and he's been playing a long time. I actually do not think he should be on the All-Star game this year. I'm not a LeBron. Well, I'm admitting LeBron has had an amazing career. Obviously, he's one of the best all time. All those things, great. I don't particularly care for how he plays the game. I think he complains a lot, so I'm just admitting my bias there. But he also, in my opinion, won a couple MVPs that I think could have gone to Kevin Durant. So that's me. But those next 5. So we got LeBron. Fine, we won't argue that point. And then the next you have some East Coast bias and some older player bias here. So you got Michael Jr. Porter from Brooklyn, Brandon Ingram from Toronto, and then you got Scotty Barnes from Toronto mixed in there. Kawhi Leonard, who, while he has had great games, I don't think he's been at an all-star level yet. That 5 is interesting, to say the least. And then the next player beyond that, you get Booker. So it's just the way the voting happened by conference was meaningless, in my opinion. It skewed teams to the Eastern Conference and that East Coast bias even more so this year than ever. It's pushed some of the better Western players down further than they would normally be. And it makes the reserve selecting, which is done by the coaches, really important. But what they haven't shared, at least anywhere that I can find, and it's certainly not in any of the writing if they have published the process for it, we don't know how they're going to divide up the remaining players on the USA teams. We don't know how they're going to split those teams. So are they going to do it strictly by the voting results? That would be bad. I think I've illustrated that point. Or are they going to do it to better round out the teams to compete with the world team? That would be what I think they're going to do. But that world team is going to be tough. And I'm not sure. I think if I'm the league and I want the best game, I think I'm assembling a team that can compete with Giannis, Doncic, Shea, Joker, and Wemby, and then having the second USA team be, well, these are all good players. You're going to have to compete. You got the stacked against you. Do your best, right? That's how I would approach it. I don't know if it's a good look or not, but that's my problem with the process. It's a little weird. A lot of things left to be decided. The voting mattered less this year than ever because of this structure dissonance between the game and the voting, and I didn't like it. I think the voters, the fan voters, should have more of a say in the All Star, and I think it should be balanced evenly with coaches and media. I don't think the players should be voting. If you ask them, they all are all over the place with their strategy. Some players don't vote; they have someone else do it for them. Some players just vote for the players on their team that deserve it. It's a disaster. Like they don't want to be doing it. Just take it away from them. Let it be fans for half, and let it be coaches for the other half, and let the voting match the game that's going to be played. I know this is the first year for this new style of game. Maybe it'll stick, maybe it won't. I think the ratings are going to have a lot to say with it. But I think the fact that the voting didn't match the structure of the game, it really has caused some weirdness about who's getting in, which team they're going to be on, and the East Coast is getting some players up in there that shouldn't be up in there. That is for sure. So that's my take. I hope you enjoyed it. Probably way too nerdy to talk about this in this detail, but that's what I've been thinking about. Coming up next on some future episodes, we're going to do our how to watch NBA games, especially as we've gotten to the second half. This is when people start tuning in, so that's going to be coming up real soon. I've got an idea with my son who plays to do a little bit of review of the kicks that are out there, different footwear, how the kids are feeling about all that, and just some other fun stuff I've seen. But anyway, that's my take on a little bit of an issue with the All-Star game and the voting. Hope you enjoyed it. Check back soon. And remember, shoot or shoot. See you.